The alien ship landed in New York at midnight when the city should have been alive with lights and noise, but instead everything fell silent, as if the world itself held its breath and waited for something terrible to happen. Tony Stark stood on the roof of his tower watching the massive vessel descend through the clouds with technology that made even his advanced systems look primitive. And beside him, the Hulk growled low in his throat, sensing danger before anyone else could understand what was coming. The ship did not attack and it did not send soldiers, but instead released a wave of purple energy that swept across the city in seconds, and everywhere it touched, people collapsed where they stood, falling into a deep sleep that no one could wake them from. And Tony felt his own eyelids growing heavy before his suit injected him with stimulants that kept him conscious, while chaos erupted around him. Only those with enhanced biology or protected technology remained awake, and Tony realized with growing horror that included very few people in the entire city. And the Hulk remained awake because nothing could force his body to sleep against his will. And together they watched as millions of people simply dropped into slumber. The alien leader appeared on every screen in the city, a tall female creature with blue skin and silver eyes that seemed to look through walls and into souls, and she spoke in perfect English with a voice that carried both authority and something that might have been sadness. She called herself Zara, and she explained that her people had been watching humanity for generations, waiting to see if humans would destroy themselves or grow beyond their violent nature, and the test had come early because humanity had begun reaching into deep space where ancient rules applied and consequences followed actions. Her people had put the city to sleep as a demonstration of power and as a warning that humanity needed to change its ways, before venturing further into the galaxy where older and less patient species waited. And she gave them one cycle of their sun to prove that humans could protect the innocent and care for the helpless without war or violence. The test was simple and terrible in its simplicity, because while adults slept, all children under the age of 10 remained awake and aware and crying for parents who could not wake. And Zara announced that if the children were not cared for properly, if even one child came to serious harm, then her people would judge humanity as failed and take actions that she did not specify. But that carried the weight of extinction in her tone. Tony Stark felt fear. Then real fear that his technology could not solve, because he was a genius with machines, but children were not machines and they needed things he had never been good at providing. And beside him, the Hulk made a sound that was almost a whimper, because Bruce Banner somewhere inside that green body understood what was at stake across the city. Maybe 200 people remained conscious, including heroes and criminals alike, and they all heard the same message and faced the same test, and Tony knew that stopping looters or maintaining order mattered far less than the thousands of children who were now alone and terrified in a sleeping city. The first child Tony found was a little girl named Amy, who sat on a sidewalk next to her sleeping mother, crying so hard she could barely breathe, and Tony landed beside her in his armor and realized he had no idea what to do, because his usual response to problems involved repulsor beams and witty comments, and neither would help here. The Hulk appeared from around a corner carrying 3 children carefully, in his massive arms like they were made of glass, and the children were not afraid of him because fear requires understanding, and they only understood that this big green man had promised to find their parents and take care of them until everyone woke up. Tony watched the Hulk set the children down gently and realized that Bruce Banner had always been better with vulnerability than Tony ever was, because Bruce understood what it meant to be helpless and afraid, and the Hulk protected what Banner cherished most, which was innocence. They gathered children from all over the area, bringing them to the tower where Tony had generators and supplies, and where his AI could help coordinate care, and other heroes arrived, bringing more children, until the lobby filled with hundreds of small faces looking for comfort that adults who fought aliens and monsters were not trained to provide. A woman named Kate appeared at the tower door, one of the few civilians who had been awake due to a medical implant, and she took one look at Tony trying to figure out how to make a bottle for an infant, and gently took the baby from him, with the kind of competence that came from experience rather than intelligence. More people like Kate arrived throughout the night, regular people who happened to be awake and who knew how to care for children, because they did it every day without armor or powers. And Tony realized that the test was not just about keeping children alive, but about learning to value the skills that did not involve fighting. The Hulk sat in the corner of the lobby surrounded by children who climbed on him like he was a jungle gym, and he let them pull his hair and poke his face, and he made rumbling sounds that were almost like purring when they laughed, and Tony saw that the Hulk understood something about innocence that Tony had lost somewhere in his decades of cynicism. By dawn, they had established a system with the conscious adults handling the actual child care while Tony provided resources and the Hulk provided protection and reassurance, because his presence made the children feel safe, in a way that technology never could. Amy, the first girl Tony had found, stayed close to him despite having other caregivers available, and she held his hand with a trust that made his chest tight because she believed he would keep her safe, and he realized he would die before letting her down. The alien Zara appeared again at noon, walking through the streets like she owned them, and she studied the makeshift shelters and feeding stations that had appeared overnight, and she watched the Hulk play gently with a group of toddlers while Tony argued with his AI about diaper inventory. She approached Tony directly, and her silver eyes studied him with an intensity that made his suit sensors spike, and she asked him what he had learned. Because the test was not just about actions but about understanding, Tony wanted to give her a clever answer, something that would show his intelligence and wit. But Amy squeezed his hand and he looked down at her tired face and realized the only true answer was that he had learned he was not as important as he thought he was. The real heroes of the past day had been people like Kate and the other caregivers who knew how to soothe crying babies and calm frightened children and make everything feel okay, even when the world had gone mad and Tony had just been support infrastructure doing what he did best, so others could do what they did best. The Hulk approached, then still carrying two children who had fallen asleep against his chest, and he looked at Zara with eyes that held both Banner and the Hulk, and he said in his deep voice that hurt children was wrong, and anyone who protected children was good. And it was the simplest moral code possible. Zara studied them both for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression, and she nodded slowly and said that humanity had passed the first test because they had put aside their differences and their pride to care for those who could not care for themselves. She explained that her people had watched humans build weapons that could destroy planets while children starved in the streets, and they had seen brilliance wasted on destruction instead of creation, and they had doubted whether humanity deserved to join the galactic community. But in one night, the best and worst of humanity had worked together without hesitation to protect innocence, and that suggested hope for the future even if the path forward would be difficult. The purple energy reversed itself, sweeping back across the city, and people began to wake confused but unharmed, and children ran to parents who had no memory of sleeping, and the city began to return to normal as if nothing had happened. But Tony knew everything had changed because he had seen what mattered when all the technology and power in the world could not solve the simplest human need. And he had watched the Hulk be gentle and caregivers be brave, and he had held Amy's hand while she trusted him to keep her safe. Zara departed with a final warning that her people would be watching, and that humanity's actions in the stars would be judged by how they treated their most vulnerable at home, and that power without compassion was just another form of destruction. The Hulk returned to being Bruce Banner eventually, and Bruce sought out the caregivers who had helped during the crisis, and he started programs to support them, because he understood now that protecting the innocent required more than just punching threats. Tony upgraded the tower to serve as a shelter when needed, and he diverted resources from weapons research to support systems for families because Amy's trust had changed something fundamental in how he saw his role in the world. Kate, and others like her, became part of a network that connected heroes with the people who did the daily work of making society function, and slowly the divide between powered individuals and regular humans began to close, because everyone had value in keeping children safe. Years later, when humans ventured further into space, they carried with them the memory of the night their city slept and their children needed protection, and they built their ships with medical bays and schools before they added weapons, and they approached new worlds with caution and respect. Zara watched from her own world, and